Hey everyone, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, picture yourself returning home after a 12-hour shift only to discover a weapon-free zone notice posted on your door, directly aimed at your private property. My HOA, Karen President, chose to declare war on the Second Amendment, convinced she could pressure me into backing down. But she made one critical error. She had no idea that I'm actually the person who upholds the law. The first story is called Homeowner Association, and Karen dialed 911 to shut down my garage gathering. This whole situation kicked off roughly 8 months ago. I'd spent years living in a downtown apartment, but as the job grew more demanding and my need to unwind became increasingly pressing, I concluded that I needed more room. I wanted a garage. I wanted a yard. And I wanted a place where I wouldn't have to listen to my neighbors fighting through paper-thin walls. I came across a nice foreclosure in a reasonable area. It required some repairs, but I'm pretty capable with my hands, and the price worked for me. The only drawback was the mandatory HOA, but I figured if I stayed out of trouble, paid my fees, and kept the lawn maintained, no one would give me grief. I was mistaken, though. I'm a single man in my early 40s, and I have two German Shepherds, Rex and Bailey, along with two cats that are convinced they're dogs. I also ride a motorcycle. It's a loud, heavy cruiser that I've spent years putting my own touch on. And to the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, I checked off every item on her list of undesirables. Her name, let's just refer to her as the president, was a nightmare from the moment the moving truck drove off. She lived directly across the street. Our very first interaction wasn't a welcome gesture or a plate of baked goods. It was her standing at the foot of my driveway, clipboard in hand, staring at my truck. I walked over, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and introduced myself. I extended my hand, but she didn't take it. She simply looked at my dogs, who were sitting calmly behind the gate I just put up, and informed me that aggressive breeds were looked down upon in this community. I told her they weren't aggressive, just large. She made a note on her clipboard and walked off without another word. That was day one. Over the following weeks, the fines started piling up. It became almost a routine. I'd drag myself home after a 12-hour shift, head to the mailbox, and find a crisp white envelope. Inside would be a notice citing me for something completely trivial. One week my grass was too tall. I measured it. It was perfectly within the limits. The next week my trash bins had been left out too long. The rules stated they had to be brought in by 6 p.m., but I work rotating shifts, so sometimes I don't get back until 8 p.m. or even later if a booking runs over. I tried addressing this with the board through email, explaining that my schedule changes regularly, but I received a generic automated reply telling me that rules are rules and that making exceptions leads to chaos. The president appeared to have turned monitoring my daily life into her full-time occupation. If I washed my bike in the driveway, she was watching for her window. If I had a friend visiting, she'd cruise past slowly in her beige sedan, peering into my garage. It was unsettling, but I let it go. I also keep my professional and personal lives completely separate. I don't wear my uniform commuting to and from work. I change at the station. When I'm at home, I'm just a regular guy in jeans and a t-shirt. My neighbors were aware I work for the city, but I don't think any of them knew precisely what I did. I prefer it that way. Being a police officer tends to shift how people interact with you, and I simply wanted to be an ordinary neighbor. Things escalated when she decided to go after the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. Given my profession, I carry a firearm every day, but I also collect historical firearms and enjoy sport shooting. One Saturday afternoon, I was in my garage with the door open, cleaning a few rifles after a range session. I was seated at my workbench, music playing softly, wiping down the barrel of a bolt-action hunting rifle, when a shadow suddenly fell across the bench. I looked up to find the president standing right at the entrance of my garage. She appeared horrified, eyes wide, clutching her scarf tightly. She demanded to know what I was doing, and I told her I was cleaning my equipment. She pointed a trembling finger at the rifle and told me that guns were dangerous and that she didn't feel comfortable knowing they were in the neighborhood. I calmly informed her that everything was unloaded, that I was on my private property, and that I was handling everything responsibly. She didn't care. She told me she would be raising this at the next board meeting and that she would not stand for what she called a militia operating across the street from her home. I laughed at that, which turned out to be a mistake. She went red in the face, spun on her heel, and marched back to her house. 2 days later, a mass email was sent out to the entire community. It was a board newsletter, and in bold red text at the bottom, it announced a new safety initiative. It declared that the HOA was now a weapon-free zone and that residents were prohibited from storing assault weapons or military-grade firearms in their homes or garages. I genuinely snorted my coffee reading it. You simply cannot retroactively ban the legal ownership of firearms on private residential property through an HOA newsletter. That's not how the law works. That's not how the Constitution works. I know the law. I enforce the law. And by the way, guys, if you lived in this neighborhood and happen to be a gun enthusiast, what would you do if your HOA sent out a newsletter suddenly declaring gun ownership illegal within the community? Also, if you enjoy these HOA stories, please don't forget to hit like on the video and maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much. I knew without a doubt that her little rule held about as much legal weight as something scrawled on a napkin. A few weeks passed, and things were fairly quiet. Work kept me occupied. We had a major case involving a catalytic converter theft ring that had us pulling double shifts. When we finally broke it open and made the arrests, the whole squad was riding high. We needed to let off some steam. We needed a night to just be normal human beings, drink some beer, eat some unhealthy food, and forget about paperwork and court dates for a while. I offered a host. I got a wide driveway, a big grill, and a garage fridge that's always well-stocked. We set it for a Friday evening. I invited about 15 guys from the department, mostly patrol officers, a couple of detectives, and 2 K9 handlers who were close friends of mine. Friday came around. I spent the afternoon prepping the meat and getting everything set up, and my buddy started arriving around 6 p.m. Now, you have to understand what this looks like from the outside. When 15 cops get together for a barbecue, we don't resemble a church choir. We look like a group of large, bearded guys rolling in on motorcycles and pickup trucks. We wear leather cuts, heavy boots, and sunglasses. To someone unfamiliar with the context, specifically the eye of a judgmental suburban tyrant, we probably looked like a biker gang descending on the cul-de-sac. We were being respectful, though. The music wasn't loud. Everyone was parked legally without blocking any driveways. We were in the garage and on the driveway, laughing, swapping stories from work, and checking out each other's bikes. It was a genuinely good time. About an hour in, I noticed the blinds flutter in the house across the street. The president was watching. I waved. She didn't wave back. One of my buddies, Mike, had just picked up a new off-duty carry piece, a compact pistol with some really nice custom work on it. He wanted to show it to me, and we were standing in the garage. He cleared the weapon, checked the safety, and handed it over. I was admiring the grip stippling when I heard a screech from the street. I looked up. The president was standing at the edge of my driveway, phone in hand, looking absolutely triumphant. She shouted that she had caught us, that she knew I was violating the new rules, and that she had photographic proof of illegal weapons on the property. I walked down the driveway to speak with her. I still had the pistol in my hand, but it was completely safe. Realizing how the situation looked, I tucked it into my waistband at the small of my back before getting too close to her. I asked what her issue was, and she started screaming that she had banned guns in the neighborhood, that I was harboring criminals. She pointed at Mike, who stands 6 feet 4 inches and is covered in tattoos, but is honestly one of the most gentle people I've ever known, and called him a thug. She threatened to fine me thousands of dollars and place a lien on my house. Then she went for the ultimate threat. She was calling the police to have us all arrested and the so-called illegal garage party shut down. I tried to warn her. I genuinely did. I said, "Ma'am, you really don't want to do that." She smirked. It was that smug, superior expression of someone who believes they hold all the cards. She told me I was scared because I knew I was in the wrong. Then she dialed 911 right there in front of me, putting it on speakerphone so I could hear my supposed doom unfolding. I stood there and listened as she lied to the dispatcher. She didn't simply report a noise complaint. She reported a violent gang disturbance. She claimed there were men brandishing guns and threatening neighbors, and that she feared for her life. She hit every buzzword designed to guarantee a massive, high-priority police response. The dispatcher asked if she was in a safe location. She said she was retreating to her home, but could see us loading weapons. I just shook my head. Mike walked up beside me and asked if she had actually called it in. I nodded. He started laughing, then went back to the garage and filled everyone in. The reaction was split. Half the guys thought it was hilarious. The other half were irritated. A man with a gun call is no laughing matter in terms of response protocol. It puts everyone on edge. We all knew the responding officers would be coming in fast, given the nature of the call, and we knew we had to be smart about it. I told the group, when they pull up, no sudden movements, hands visible. Let's not get shot by the night shift. We agreed to wait in the driveway, bottles down, hands empty. 10 minutes later, the cavalry arrived. And I mean the cavalry, because she had reported multiple armed men in a gang fight. They didn't send one car. They sent 4, a sergeant and 3 patrol units. The response was textbook. They didn't simply roll up and park. They cut their sirens a block away to approach quietly, then burst into the cul-de-sac with floodlights blazing. Doors flew open. Police, hands. Let me see those hands. It was Officer Mueller on point. He was a rookie I had personally field-trained 2 years prior, but right now he was running on pure adrenaline. Crouched behind his door, weapon drawn, aimed directly at my chest. "Everybody stay where you are," another officer shouted. The president came marching out of her house, pointing toward my garage and yelling at the officers. "That's them. That's the gang. They have guns." She charged toward Mueller, which is the worst possible thing you can do during a high-risk stop. "Ma'am, get back in your house." Mueller yelled, his eyes never leaving us. He was terrified. He saw 15 large guys in leather cuts and was doing the math in his head. I didn't move. I kept my hands raised high, palms open, and I knew I needed to de-escalate this before something went wrong. "Mueller," I called out in my command voice. "Check your background. It's Sergeant Opie, stand down. Müller Frotze." He blinked, trying to see past the glare of the spotlight. He lowered his weapon slightly, squinting. "Sarge, it's a barbecue." "Mueller," I said, slowly bringing my hands down. "Hold stop." The tension in the air snapped like a rubber band. Mueller straightened up, visibly confused. The other officers, recognizing my voice and beginning to recognize the faces of the so-called gang members, started lowering their weapons. The sergeant on duty was a guy named Connor. We go way back. Connor walked up, took in the crowd, took in the gang, and started chuckling. "So this is the gang activity?" he asked, gesturing toward my crew. "Apparently," I said. "We're a menace to society, Connor." Mike brought potato salad that might violate health codes, but that's about the extent of it. The president was shaking with rage and bewilderment. She stepped between me and Connor and demanded to know why we weren't being arrested, insisting we had guns. Connor looked at her steadily. He has that flat, measured tone that stops rowdy college kids cold, and told her to lower her voice. He explained that firearm ownership is legal in this state and that simply possessing them on private property is not a criminal offense. She literally stomped her foot. She said the HOA rules had banned them. Connor sighed and explained very patiently that police enforce state and federal law, not HOA bylaws. He told her that if she had a civil dispute with me, she could address it through the management company, but that calling 911 for a non-emergency was a misuse of the system. Then she made her fatal mistake. She doubled down on the lie. She pointed at Mike again and said, "He pointed a gun at me. I saw him. That's assault. I want him arrested." The mood shifted immediately. The laughter stopped. Accusing a police officer of a felony is an extremely serious matter. Mike stepped forward, no longer smiling. "Ma'am," he said, moving into the light and pulling his badge from his belt, holding it up. "I'm Detective Kowalski, City PD. I have not pointed a weapon at anyone today, but you have just committed a crime by filing a false report." The president scoffed. She didn't believe him. She claimed we were all covering for each other and demanded to speak to the real police, implying the uniformed officers present were somehow part of the conspiracy. Connor looked at me. She called 911, and reported an active weapons threat? She did. I confirmed. Speakerphone. I heard the whole thing. Connor turned back to the president. Ma'am, you initiated an emergency response based on fabricated information. You claimed there were men waving guns and threatening neighbors. I've arrived on scene to find a gathering of off-duty law enforcement officers having a barbecue. No laws are being broken and no one is in danger. She went pale. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. They're police? She whispered. Every single one of them, Connor said, including the homeowner you've been harassing. She looked at me. I gave her a little wave. Hi, neighbor, I said. Connor continued. We take false reporting very seriously. It pulls resources away from actual emergencies. Someone could be having a heart attack or getting robbed right now, but instead 4 units are here because you have a problem with your neighbor. She started backpedaling. She said she made a mistake, that it looked like a gang, that she was only trying to protect the community. But Connor wasn't having it. He handed her a citation, a summons for misuse of 911. It's a misdemeanor, but it carries a substantial fine and a mandatory court appearance. You need to sign this, Connor said. She signed with a trembling hand, looking as though she wished the earth would open up beneath her. The neighbors, who had all gathered to watch this unfold, were whispering and pointing. Her authority, her carefully cultivated image as the neighborhood's protector, was crumbling in real time. Connor issued her a warning. If another call came in from her regarding my address and turned out to be false, he would personally see to it that charges for harassment were explored. Do you understand? She nodded, tears forming in her eyes, then turned and walked back to her house with her head down, completely defeated. She didn't look back. The officers stuck around for a bit. I offered them burgers, but they were on duty and couldn't accept. They did hang around for about 10 minutes to catch up with the guys and check out the bikes, and it turned into an impromptu department meetup right there in my driveway. It was actually pretty great. Once they left, the party picked back up, a little quieter than before, mostly because the adrenaline had worn everyone out. The guys decided it was the most entertaining thing that had happened all year. Mike kept joking that he was going to put gang leader on his business card. But the aftermath at work was just as satisfying as the look on her face. For weeks, "Hey, is the HOA watching?" became the standard greeting whenever I walked into the precinct. Even the chief called me, shook his head, and laughed about Karen tried to order a sergeant to arrest a detective. The legal consequences for her were significant. I wasn't there for her court date, but Connor filled me in afterward. She attempted to contest the citation, claiming she had felt threatened, and the judge played back the 911 recording in which she could be heard clearly embellishing the threat to trigger a faster response. The judge spent 10 minutes lecturing her about wasting police resources before upholding the fine and ordering her to cover court costs. A week later, I received a notice from the management company. I braced myself for another fine, but it turned out to be an apology letter. It stated that the board had reviewed the so-called weapon-free zone policy and determined it was inconsistent with state law and the community's governing documents. The policy was rescinded effective immediately. They also voided all of my previous fines, every single one of them. The grass, the trash bins, all of it. I suspect the management company realized that having a police officer as a resident who could potentially sue them for harassment was a liability they had no interest in carrying. But the real victory came the next HOA meeting. I decided to attend, still in uniform, since I'd come straight from work. During the open forum, a motion was put forward to remove the president from the board. And it didn't come from me. It came from a sweet older woman who lives 2 doors down. She cited mismanagement of funds and the creation of potential legal liability for the association. The vote was nearly unanimous. The president was removed. She gathered her belongings and stormed out of the meeting room, muttering about how ungrateful everyone was. Since then, life has been peaceful. The new board president is a guy who works in IT. He has no interest in my motorcycles, but he likes my dogs. He even came to me for advice on home security systems. And the house next to the former president just went up for sale. I spotted the sign yesterday. I'm hoping a drummer moves in, or maybe a guy with a ridiculously loud muscle car. But honestly, Anyone would be an improvement over the quiet that settles over a neighborhood kept hostage by fear. I'm heading out to the garage now. Rex and Bailey are waiting, and the guys are coming over for another shop night. We'll be loud, we'll be happy, and we'll be completely within the law. So to every HOA tyrant out there, before you start declaring constitutional rights null and void, maybe take a moment to find out who actually lives in that house with a loud motorcycle. Stay safe out there and watch your six. The next one is a satisfying little petty revenge story about some seriously entitled neighbors that you won't want to miss. It's called Neighbors Try to Own the Entire Street in Front of Their House. Not as dramatic as some other posts out there, but I'm working on it. My neighbors to the left have been difficult, borderline unhinged, ever since I moved in 5 years ago. We kept things civil right up until last summer, when the 70 to 75-year-old husband complained to my partner for the second time. Yes, the second time, because a friend of ours had parked in front of their house for 24 hours during a bachelor trip. Worth noting, even with our friend's car parked there, both the husband and wife could still fit their large truck and Jeep without any issue. There was plenty of space available, especially since the house on the other side of them has no vehicles, so they could easily park in front of that property too. But whatever, keeping the peace and all, so we do our best to avoid parking in front of their house, simply because they're not worth the headache. Still, I knew at that point I was done pretending to be pleasant. Yesterday was MLK Day. I heard a knock at our door at 8 a.m., but it was a holiday and I was off work, so I stayed in bed. Later, when my partner left for therapy, the neighbor intercepted him and said, "Yeah, we called the cops on you because you keep parking too close to our car. The officer was going to ticket you, but I told him I'd speak with you first." My partner, who always tries to sidestep drama, just shrugged it off and went to his appointment. When he told me about it 4 hours later, I was skeptical. For one thing, I hadn't been parked illegally. I was roughly 2 feet from their car and parked directly in front of my own house. If a ticket had genuinely been warranted, I would have received one or at least found a note on my door. Besides, I was parked in front of my own property on our apron. No driveway, just an apron. What exactly was the issue? So, being the pot stirrer that I am, I went outside and nudged my car a little closer. Now, just 1 foot between us. As I shut my car door, I caught sight of their cameras and threw up a peace sign with a little hip lean toward their house. They have cameras covering every square inch of the property, and the front-facing one covers my entire lawn, so they absolutely saw it. I also called the non-emergency police line, asked to speak with the officer who had visited my address, explained the situation, and he laughed and told me he had never had any intention of ticketing me. When he relayed that to our neighbor, the man was grumpy and furious. They then offered to perform house checks for us, since we're leaving for our honeymoon soon. Lovely, right? A few hours passed, and suddenly there was a police cruiser parked in front of the neighbor's place. He had called again and shown the officer the camera footage, trying to argue that I had been flipping him off rather than throwing a peace sign. Thankfully, the officer was sharp enough to know the difference. The officer then came to our door. I let him in and walked him through the whole history. The repeated threats, the fear-mongering, the false claim that the previous officer had been about to ticket me, and just how disrespectful and childish this neighbor had been acting. I explained that I was completely done accommodating these people. Our neighbor on the right has also had issues with them, more racially charged, as our difficult neighbor has shown clear prejudice, and they happen to be a brown family. So we're very much on the same page. I made clear to the officer that I understood he was innocent in all of this and simply playing the role of middleman. But since I'm doing nothing illegal or morally objectionable, I intended to keep parking exactly where I wanted. The officer essentially encouraged me to carry on and simply make sure to steer clear of anything actually illegal. I agreed and thanked him. Not the most dramatic revenge, I know, but this is just the beginning. I'm going to keep parking 1 foot from their Jeep in front of my own house on our apron over our non-existent driveway and let him work himself up over it. That can't be great for his blood pressure in the long run. And if the police keep being called on me for perfectly legal behavior, I'll simply stop answering the door and make sure to file for harassment and a restraining order. The officers are already well acquainted with these neighbors, given how often they call for completely frivolous reasons, And our neighbors to the right have even had to call the police on them before for making threats against them and their children. Not every neighbor is like this, thankfully. We're planning to move in the next year or two anyway. But I work from home, and as you can tell, I take a certain pleasure in stirring the pot. And hey, if you've ever found yourself in a similarly petty conflict with obnoxious, entitled neighbors, drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear your story. And the last one is a pro-revenge story titled Gas Thief Revenge. I had a neighbor who would walk into my backyard, take my gas can, the one I kept for my mower, use it to fill up his car and his own mower, and then return the empty can. I figured this out because I'd started noticing something suspicious. That 5-gallon can was nearly empty every single time I went to mow, even though the lawnmower itself was only about a quarter tank low. This was back before affordable, easy-to-install security cameras were widely available. So I set up a webcam from my laptop running motion detection software. Sure enough, I caught the guys slipping into my backyard literally 5 minutes after I'd left the house. For the following week, every time I needed to use the bathroom, I relieved myself into that gas can. Now it was full of urine, but still carried enough of a gasoline smell to fool someone who wasn't paying close attention. I then placed it back on the rear patio, made a visible show of checking the fluids in my car, packed a few bags, and made sure the neighbor was aware that I was heading out on a trip and would be gone for a while. I was hoping he'd take the bait. I returned home about an hour later, car trouble, and found a thief in his front yard yanking the starter cord on his lawnmower so violently it looked like he was on the verge of a stroke, turning bright red and swearing. A little while later, he climbed into his car, made it a few blocks up the road, and then stalled out completely. I checked my gas can on the patio. Empty. I'll also add that this guy was a genuinely terrible person. That wasn't the only thing he pulled on me. I eventually discovered he had outstanding arrest warrants. So I took care of that situation by applying for a sheriff's ride-along program in his name. And that, as they say, was that. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.